The Things We All Carry is a podcast about first responders and their stories surrounding trauma on the job. The intention of this podcast is to raise awareness and share meaningful conversation around a subject often viewed as taboo or simply ignored. Be aware this content may be graphic and it is real. It may not be suitable for children or adults triggered by this subject matter.
Welcome back to The Things We All Carry. Today, you're finding me in exotic Beaver Creek, Ohio. And if you've listened, you know that there's the conference is this week. And it's a former guest of mine and now friend of mine, Jim Berniga, is one of the guys who created this conference. It's Brothers Helping Brothers. Mental Health Wellness Conference, and it's 2.5 days. I'll be here for the next 2 days. I'm going to hang out Wednesday and Thursday and see what it's all about and interact with some people, meet some people that I've talked to on the phone and interviewed but never met in person. And then and just try to get some good information out there. Some pretty good speakers that I'm interested in hearing and kind of picking their brain a little bit. So I think it'll be good. It's going to be interesting. I'm trying to get the show done so I can concentrate just on getting ready for that. It's I'm finding that this is a really weird time for me. I knew that I would have some emotion leading up to the end of this month and throughout this whole month. But in some manner, I keep reliving some of last year, and I can't just drop it and let it go. And it's obvious it's some stuff that I'm going to have to work on and work through. And I don't know if this is a matter of time, that kind of the more removed I am from the situation, the more we move away from that date that my mom died, that things will change for me. But man, grief is weird. I gotta tell you, I said it before, you just can't predict this. And not only is it weird, but it's kind of like a little motherfucker, because it will rise up and put you on your ass. There's been a couple of times where it's felt that way for me. What is today, the 14th or 15th? The 15th of October? And I'm 2 weeks away from the 1-year anniversary of her death. And yeah, I'll be the first one to admit that I'm not ready for that. I'm not ready to go through all those emotions again. And, but I know that, like I said, I think it was last week in the intro, I'm going to have to sit in some of this. I'm going to have to sit in the grief. I'm going to have to sit in some of the stuff that is my own doing, that I've, that I created either before her death or even after her death, that's causing me some emotional turmoil. And it's all stuff that I have to sit with. I have to learn how to grapple with and deal with and forgive and give grace and move forward. And I mean, give grace to myself. And that's probably harder than giving it to anybody else in the entire universe. We aren't nice to ourselves, and I am definitely not nice to myself. I've had some really good bouts these past couple of weeks of really negative talk and really negative thoughts, and it's just beating myself up over little things, and then the whole grief thing, and it adds up a little bit, not a little bit, it adds up quite a bit. I've had really positive things happen in my life too, and so there's things to be very excited about, and there's things that I also need to work on, and I'm aware of that, and others are aware of that, and I'm not escaping that. And so I had a conversation this week, and it was about actions versus words, and it's to stop using the words and take action. And so that's where I am. I'm reaching out, finding who I can speak to on a professional level about some of these things in my life and try to get that out there and work on it. I do a lot of this stuff. Sorry. In the past, I've done a lot of this stuff right here. I've espoused what's going on, discussed it, and kind of worked through it in my own head. And I'm not sure how I can do that right now. I'll be the first to admit it. And I think I said it last week that I wasn't always open and not that truthful. I guess it was kind of a lies by omission in a way with therapy. And so I need to revisit therapy, and I need to be very open, and I need to also have some new information in my life after having visits with my sister and talking about my dad. And I don't know how that affects me, but I can tell you what, I'm scared to find out. Uh, you know, oh, yeah, it's going to be interesting. It could be quite a journey, quite a ride. But I think it's something I have to do for me, and I have to do for the future. Future me, future relationships, future just in general, my not even for future relationships, but present relationships moving into the future, I suppose is the best way to put it. Um, I I've said it before, take the small steps that lead to the bigger steps, and they lead to being a better person. And I want to be a better person in this world. I want to be a better person in this life. Um, I want to live the life that my mother would have been proud of me for living. And I want to be that person that she's proud of me for being. And I have steps to take before I get there. And I know that. I recognize it. And now it's time to take that action. And that action is the most necessary part. I can take all these words and throw them at you, and it doesn't mean anything without taking action. I can sit here and say, just fucking talk. But it doesn't really mean anything if I just say it. And I kind of paid lip service to that in the past, and it's time for me to kind of own up to that shit. And when I say just fucking talk, I mean I need to just fucking talk about everything. So this whole, in today's show, we talk about trauma being on the spectrum and how you have slight trauma to this grand trauma, big T versus little T kind of thing. And I guess I'm in that where that kind of, I talked, but not enough. I talked, but maybe not enough the right stuff. I need to open up completely. And how do you open up completely? So I have to learn how to trust. And I don't know what's going to come of future therapies or future work I do on myself. But I know I need to be more open and honest with myself and a therapist, or myself and the people in my life. So with that being said, let me introduce today's guest. This is episode 138 of The Things We All Carry. Today I have Mike on the show, and Mike is a trauma and suicide researcher. He's a fascinating person. I met him a few weeks ago when I went down to Kenny Mitchell's event in Richmond, Operation Yellow Tape. I had a booth set up, and Mike was sitting right in front of me, and he says, he sees my shirt, and he literally says it to me, so what do you want to fucking talk about? And I said, well, what do you bring to the table? And he said, let me tell you what I do. And we talked about his research in trauma. We talked about his research in suicide, how his stuff is focused solely on military veterans and first responders, and how our trauma affects us in different ways, and how our trauma is different from everybody else. And our trauma is different. My trauma as a first responder is different from his trauma as a veteran, and is different from someone else's trauma as a cop. And how we need to have these different definitions for what we experience. So this is going to be a 2-part episode. Today's episode focuses mostly on Mike's background and his trauma, or not his trauma, excuse me, and trauma in general. So we talk about military trauma, first responder trauma in general, big T, little t, the spectrum of trauma, and fight or flight, and a number of things in between all of that. And then next week is going to be more of Mike talking, but it's going to be focused more on the suicide aspect of his research, and I won't get too far into it, but the whys behind it. Mike was one of those guys that I think I could sit and talk with for hours on end. And we did that one Sunday afternoon. And this is the product of it. So I hope that what he has to share about trauma today is helpful and enlightening for you guys. And as always, if you have any questions or if you have any comments, I need you to reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on TikTok. You can find me on my website, and you can find me on Substack. So if you need all that stuff, find me on Instagram. That's the easiest way to do it. The Things We All Carry. It's at The Things We All Carry on Instagram. So reach out to me there. Tell me what you think. And hopefully this show has some good information for you, because I think it was a fascinating conversation. You guys get outside and do something for yourselves today.
A quick reminder to please help us build a community which not only recognizes, but supports each other through the struggles and recovery. Reach out through Instagram at The Things We All Carry, or email mystory@thethingsweallcarry.com to offer support and share your story. Please remember to leave a review on iTunes and give a shout out to any first responder you know, love, or care about. Y'all enjoy the show.
Perfect. It was recording, so we're good. Let me get that burp out of the way before I get on here and start talking and rambling like an idiot. So, all right, welcome back to The Things We All Carry. Today I have Mike, and Mike is, I went down to Richmond, what was that, 2 weeks ago, Mike? 3 weeks ago now?
2 weeks.
Well, yeah, I was sitting there, and I went down to Richmond, and it was for Kenny Mitchell's Operation Yellow Tape, and Kenny generously offered to have me set up a table, and I was just like, I think I was the odd man out, because everyone had this fancy setup, and I had a banner and stickers, and Mike was sitting in front of me, and he walked up to me, looked at my shirt, and he goes, "What do you want to fucking talk about?" And I was like, all right, I have to talk to him. And turns out that he's perfect for the show because of his background, and because of what he's doing now, which is of utmost importance. So Mike is joining us to talk about trauma and suicide. That is his focus. He's just smarter than me. And I had a good conversation with him, and I said, we have to record this. And so here we are today. Mike, if you would give us a little bit about yourself before we really get into it.
Yeah, sure thing. So, as you now know, I go by Mike, but I've been called a lot worse in real life. As Stack said, I focus on trauma and suicide research. Biggest focal area is within the military and first responder community, just because it's so obtuse, where, we see that 14% of suicides inside the United States do come from the military and first responder community. So roughly, 4 to 5% of the population makes up 14% of suicides. Recently was medically retired from the Army. I was stationed at Fort Bliss, forward observer turned behavioral health professional. That moment where I kind of came out of the combat arms world to, pick up the fight in behavioral health, kind of came out of, after doing this for 10 years, kind of sat around and realized I got a lot of dead friends, and they didn't die overseas. They died here. So.
Well, before I ask you questions about what childhood was like, where you grew up, all that stuff, let's get music out of the way. What's the last song you listened to?
Last song I listened to, I can tell you. We'll just pull out the phone here. It was Business by Eminem.
All right, there you go. The reason I asked you I'm a music guy, and it kind of goes with me everywhere. And so I've been slowly building a little playlist for Things We All Carry. And so I just add everybody's song on it, because you can't get more eclectic than one song from all kinds of people. So, where'd you grow up, man?
I grew up in Virginia, in the southwestern part of the state. Basically, let's say between Bristol and Roanoke. That's Bristol and Christiansburg, about 45 minutes south of Christiansburg. It's probably the best way to.
I'll ask off air. I'll find out what town, because I've driven through there so many times. I'm interested now. But what was childhood like down there? What was family life like, and what were those formative years like for you?
It was pretty solid. I mean, you ever see the show or the movie Friday Night Lights? There you go.
Yes.
It was
all right. That's simple.
Yeah, it's simple. Freaking in the summers, you hang out in the Walmart parking lot doing hooligan things, and then in the fall, it's all geared towards football, and then, in the spring, it's all geared towards the next season of football, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, live, die, and eat football, right?
Yeah, I mean, Fridays at 4:30, every business in town was closed. Everybody's going game.
Now, was family life, did you have an intact family life or what was that?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty solid. Got an older brother. He's actually currently active duty in the Air Force. Younger sister, she works for the state of Maryland, actually at their fire academy, doing the testing stuff for, future firefighters. Father, lawyer. Mother, she works for the government now. She's pretty high up there. I have no idea what she does, all sorts of weird stuff, but yeah, it was pretty solid. Small town, actually, small enough where, a handful of us went to either the service academies. I went to the Virginia Military Institute. Good chunk of us ended up serving. I think only a handful are left in right now because, 15, 20 years ago is when
Yeah.
everybody started to trickle out for the war.
Tell me a little bit about VMI. That's one that I don't know a lot about. I mean, I'm well aware of service academies, but VMI is not one that you hear it. I mean, it's in the shadows, right?
Right. So if we really want to talk about being in the shadows, so prior to attending VMI, I went to Valley Forge Military College, which is now designated the Military College of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And that's where, I'm still confused on how me and this guy became friends, let alone best friends. But that's where I met one of my buddies, Thomas Bradshaw, who 2.5 years ago passed away due to the topic of this podcast, essentially.
Gotcha.
And he and I ended up going to VMI after that. So it's just silly. It's just a silly place. I mean, great schools altogether. They both really instilled certain things in myself and others, which is kind of hard to describe with a word, as it were. It's more of kind of like an emotional feeling towards things,
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, hey, this isn't so bad. I've been through worse. And I think that's what helped really prepare me for the military service. And then during my break-in service, I was a medic up near Baltimore County for a firehouse up there. So it really instilled that discipline, but also kind of selfless service mentality towards everything. And I think
So
that's what.
sorry, but I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was going to say, I think that's what really counts in life. Give more than you take.
And that's such a theme amongst veterans, active duty, first responders in general, because I think that's what we set out in these jobs to do, right? Is to give more than we take,
Right.
whether it's going to
And,
kill us or not.
exactly, because it's just hard to describe. I think for the most part, for a lot of people, it's more of a calling, more of, you want to do something bigger than yourself. And, the biggest thing I can say about, schools like Valley Forge or VMI is everybody suffers together. And it doesn't matter, if you were in the same class as somebody who's older than you, younger than you. Everybody has those intrinsic morals, ethics, and values that are on the same spectrum. And when, shit jumps up, you have somebody to call no matter what. Like, even if you weren't best of friends with them, even if you just kind of knew them, you can call them and, they'll be there.
Yeah, it's interesting what suffering does for, I don't know, camaraderie at the least, right? If not actual friendship and that deep friendship, it solidifies it pretty quickly when you suffer together.
Right. And I forget who said it and which podcast it was on, but somebody said something to the degree of, when you are in these situations, in these cultures, and on, teams, whether it's military or, if you're on a ladder truck with somebody, it doesn't matter how you feel about them personally. It's the unwritten, kind of bond between people where it's, I'm going to put you and the team ahead of myself. And it just kind of sticks. It's, somebody, in my experience, you could hate somebody to the core, but, when rounds start flying and bad things are happening, all that goes out the window. And it's just that intrinsic
It's
to
interesting.
rock.
It's interesting that we got on the subject because just recently I watched the Netflix series Medal of Honor, and I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it's interesting because the last one that they talk about is Ty Carter and his experience at Cop Keating during the war, and that he was aloof and he was separate from everybody. That like there was a tight knit, and then there was this guy, right? And this guy ends up helping to the point where he's given the Medal of Honor. When you looked at the whole story, Billy, that's the last guy you expected to do what he did.
Right. And then, you look at, I forget the guy's name, from Hacksaw Ridge, the medic in World War II that refused to carry, Desmond something. He refused to carry a weapon. They wanted to kick him out of the army, all this stuff. But then if you read what he actually did, I mean, my God, the one guy who everybody, who was the outcast from the pack, from society, just did all of that because personal convictions, I'm here in this unit with you and I value your life more than mine kind of deal.
Yeah, it's just crazy. So that's a cool little side quest we just took there. So from VMI, do you graduate from VMI and go into the military, or or how do you find your way to the military then?
I had a little too much fun. Here and there.
All right.
I just decided, oh, hey, look, a war.
Okay.
So I enlisted in the Coast Guard. My father was in the Coast Guard. Okay. I like boats. Then I was just like, hey, this is great. This is awesome. So I think, just to preface it, I think my enlistment in the Coast Guard gave me a really good basis for a lot of things because where I am today doing what I'm doing, I think it goes all the way back to the mentality of the Coast Guard, where intrinsically it's a life-saving service first and foremost. But there are numerous ways to save lives, whether it's on a search and rescue mission, jumping in the water, or carrying a rifle. You're preserving life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for the United States. And so I did that. I was at an expeditionary port security unit and never really got to have too much fun. But yeah, we were cool guys, I guess. Got to wear all the nice little cool uniforms. And then after some time, philosophical differences with my commander. So I bid adieu to the Coast Guard. And in that time, I was able to, finish my bachelor's degree. That's when I started, volunteering at a fire department up in the Baltimore area. Really took a liking to riding rescue. And then, the boo-boo bus, because what am I going to do? Sit around here on a ladder truck all day, just wait for something? Yeah, like, hey,
don't talk shit. Don't talk shit about my trucks.
Yeah, but the best thing is when you ride in the ambulance, you're just like, yeah, we need a lift assist. Call the firefighters. They seem like
you're
they
right
want to do
there.
something.
We're really good at moving things.
Yeah. And then after some time, I went to work in the federal IT sector. Basically, how do we kill things faster with data? Did that for about 4 or 5 years, and that wasn't it. Sitting in an office, all these meetings left and right, just, oh, how do we do this and that? And just like, okay, fuck this. Have a little too much to drink one night. I'm like, I'm going to re-enlist. And I was like, oopsies. Guess I did.
Fucking alcohol will get you every time.
Yep. My re-enlistment fueled by whiskey. Re-enlisted into the Army, forward observer. And now we're here.
And you say you were stationed at Fort Bliss for a while, right?
Correct.
Yeah, place is miserable.
Yes.
I did basic training at Fort Bliss. I hated Fort Bliss.
Oh my God, you're that old. Fuck.
Yeah, I'm that old. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I joined a long time ago, and yeah, it was.
What was it like? What was it like surfing with Audie Murphy? Jesus.
Oh yeah, you're right. It was Jesus. That place was miserable, man. For basic training, God, they had their run of us. Up there on the
Yeah.
side of that mountain, just suffering. So, but anyway, all right. So you're a Ford observer, with that job description, that MOS right there, you're going somewhere.
Yeah. Sadly, I had a top secret SCI security clearance, and not a
Mm-hmm.
lot of forward observers have those. So I got to do a lot of staff work. So I could
Ah,
look at all the intel stuff. But, we had a real world mission as well. So contributed to, target analysis, targeting, and everything that was going on overseas. So we actually got to contribute in some way from a cold, dark
okay.
room.
Yeah, it's a little different, but you're right. I mean, you go back to what you talked about your time in the Coast Guard. It's all about that effort to protect and defend, right?
Right. And I think, oddly enough, that's what drew me to being a forward observer, because when shit hits the fan, field artillery is your friend.
So how does the Army career progress for you? What what things are you experiencing other than sitting in a cold, dark room?
That was it for a while. And then almost 3 years ago, so in January would be 3 years. I mean, Fort Bliss was just bad. Within 6 months of being there, a guy who I went through training with, he completed suicide. Then in January, it would be 3 years in January. Gentleman I went to VMI with, he completed suicide. And that's what really pissed me off. And so kind of put together an idea to enhance the behavioral health system of care. And within 5 months, I'm sitting in front of the 2-star general briefing it, and they're like, "Yep, let's go." So I was put in charge of that program. I was working with the behavioral health working group. I was working. So I'm trying to finish my clinical hours for licensure now, but I was actually interning on post as a clinical provider, and that's what my last year at Fort Bliss was, and it was pretty rewarding, to be honest. And have a couple publications out of it in the NCO Journal on trauma-informed leadership and how we can better enhance how we provide care in the DoD. Yeah, so that's what that was. It was a roller coaster, that's for sure.
So then, fast forward. How do you find your way out of that? How do you find your way out of the Army, and why?
I was medically retired. 3 surgeries in the span of 5 months will do that to you. And,
Yeah.
that was a shock, bracing for that, getting out, like you are done, game over, preparing for that shock. And, I just kept doing what I'm doing, keeping in touch with folks, and, hopefully making some impactful change. And, to this day, like, I still work with the folks at Fort Bliss that I worked with before. They asked me to, "Hey, can you review this article that was published in the New York Times? Like, what do you think? Hey, here's our report. Can you let us know what you think?" And I still help them with the program I was on. So
then,
but
here we are. This is what you study: trauma and suicide.
yes,
And this is. I mean, it's this is your baby, basically. Is finding some answers, correct?
yes. I mean, going back to where everything starts, somebody completes suicide, what drove them to that? Like, how did they get there? Because nobody's born suicidal. What issues in life came up that made them, that gave them, that one, the capacity to enact violence, and two, the capacity to enact violence on themselves.
Yeah, it's kind of special to the human condition, isn't it? The fact that we do this.
It's not unique to the human condition, though. Like, every mammal has the every mammal will kill themselves. Um, and that's part of the research where, so a dolphin will drown itself. A buffalo will run off a cliff. And what's present for that? They generally they are injured, old, unable to hunt, unable to protect. So they feel a burden on the society that they're in. And because of this, they'll be isolated. So that plays into Dr. Thomas Joyner. He has the interpersonal theory of suicide, and those are two things that are generally always present in a completed suicide.
And
perceived burdensomeness and isolation.
That's ironic because that feeds into something we talked about on that Saturday that we met. That I'm assuming that we'll get into when we get into the topic of suicide, and that's your theory on what suicide is. And it was one of those, I had never approached it from the way you said it. And so when we get to that, I think that's a very interesting topic to revisit. Let's start with the very basic. What is trauma?
Depends on who you ask, really. Trauma it can be defined. So the American Psychological Association says trauma is any disturbing experience that results in significant fear, helplessness, disassociation, confusion, or other disruptive feelings intense enough to have a long-lasting negative effect on a person's attitudes, behaviors, and other aspects of functioning.
That's a mouthful.
Yes. And that's just one definition that exists. And that's coming from the APA, but the American Counseling Association has a different one. American social workers have a different one. Folks over in Europe have different ones. So, I was a poli-sci major, so words matter, definitions matter. So in the course of my research and kind of the direction I'm going is we need to define it in the sense of the military and first responders. Because I think that trauma in those communities are very unique due to the fact that they are their own cultures. The first responder community is its own culture. Military community, it's its own culture. And that's very definable due to, you see the structure of, there's a social hierarchy, there are customs, there are rites of passage, it has a unique language. It's almost cultish at times. So in the terms of this discussion with trauma is, I would say trauma can be defined as any event, experience, situation, or perceived threat to the well-being of oneself, relationships, others, unit, and personal convictions that cause an abnormal reaction, response, or change to daily life, which one's mental, emotional, or physical modus operandi is significantly disrupted, causing a notable impact on daily functioning while serving in the capacity of the armed forces or as a first responder. Because trauma sits on a spectrum. Yes, but you have to cover certain things. I know. What is trauma? Bad things. Okay.
Exactly. Yes.
But then because words mean things, you have to, okay, what are bad things?
Hey guys, quick break right here just to check in and thank each of you for listening to the show. Your support has been paramount and I appreciate all of you. I have one request though. I need you to share the show with everyone you know. Help me get the word out and spread these stories as far and as wide as we can. While you're at it, please leave a review of the show wherever you happen to listen. Feel free to reach out to me at any time to share your story, to talk, or to pass on suggestions. Let's get on with the rest of the show.
Right. Because trauma sits on a spectrum and, we're going to see that people have served in the armed forces or who have been first responders, things aren't as traumatic to them as they are to the general community. So, perfect example, morbid example. So you're driving down the highway, right? You see a dead dog on the side of the road. You're just like, that sucks. But, normal person might be all like, it's terrible for them. They might start crying and be like, oh, poor dog, this and that. It's like, well, things die and oopsie doopsie, And that's where so trauma sits on a spectrum. So you have big T and little t. So something that is traumatic. So say you and I witnessed the same thing. It could be massively traumatic to me and not traumatic at all to you. It's just like, oh, but to me, it's world ending. And, vice versa. Something that I see as not so bad, you might see as really bad. So we have to keep in mind that trauma does sit on a spectrum. However, the military and first responder community, I think that scale's a little bit more adjusted because you're exposed to it more. First responders' daily life, you're seeing this stuff. Military personnel, you're seeing this stuff. You're doing this stuff to other people. I think that's where we need to focus when we're researching trauma for these communities because of the interpersonal theory of suicide, where you've been exposed to such trauma and violence over time, you're more so okay with violence. And the more you're okay with violence, the more you're okay with violence towards yourself.
Yeah, it numbs you to it, and especially in this, then when everything else that plays into suicide comes along, you're already numb to the thought of violence. So it's not a difficult jump. I want to get back to the dog for a second, because I think that it's really important to point out that you're right. To quote unquote civilian driving by a dead dog, they're going to go, oh, that's a shame. I hate to see anything die. But to a veteran who spent time in Iraq or Afghanistan, they're looking at that dog in a completely different way. That it could be cover for a roadside bomb or something like that. Correct?
Right. So now we're having a little bit more fun with the trauma because they're numb to the dog, but it actually might be an activating image for them, causing a trauma response.
Right. And I was gonna equate a personal story to that too, because one of the few calls that actually impacted me emotionally while I was on the job, and I knew that I had shit building up in my life and on the job was a dog. And so for me to see the dog, it brings a different response too because of that call. And so it's like humans. When I saw death in humans, I was immune to that, it felt like. But when I saw death in dogs or death in animals, it affected me differently than death for humans.
So now we've kind of hit a rabbit hole with the trauma response. So yes, Iraq, Afghanistan, they plant IEDs in dead dogs all the time. So now that veteran is having a trauma response, they might speed up, they might swerve around it. But this also plays into the first responder community, where the unique challenge of that community is that you are in your community. So I'm not about to just go for a leisurely drive down MSR Tampa. Like I'm not going to get in a plane right now and fly over to the Middle East and go for a leisurely drive through Baghdad. No. But that first responder, it's their day off, takes the family out for dinner, and has to go through an intersection where the day before, they had to pull, bodies out of a burning car, or they got shot at. You are not only living with your trauma, you're living in the space that created the trauma. And the separation between on the job and off the job is very hard. It's very difficult. And we see this a lot in the military with drone operators. They're flying these UAVs that are armed from outside of Las Vegas, and then they're going home. Oh, right. Hey, I just, sent 2 Hellfires into a village and blew up a school that was being used as a weapon cache, and kids died. And after work, you go home and play with your kids. That separation of violence and family is not there.
So one of the things we talked about when we had our phone conversation the other day was, now you gave a general definition of trauma talking about military and first responders, but you also think that there should be parceled out, right? There should be a military trauma and a first responder trauma, correct?
Correct, because the biggest thing is for clinicians and providers, it's the determining our modality of treatment and what we're actually dealing with. Because, I can go through the DSM-5 and diagnose a lot of people randomly for fun if I wanted. Like, I probably diagnosed 95% of the United States population with bipolar 2. Have you, it's just, I could diagnose a lot of people with a lot of things because it's so general and broad. However, when we get down to the fine minutia of the military and the first responder communities, it's different because your baseline has changed, your brain has been rewired a certain way, and, things that people outside of these communities would think are abnormal are just normal for us. And so when there's a shift in that normalcy, we really have to interrogate that, because we are, 80% of suicides are relationship based. And big thing is, within the military and the first responder communities, we get very, very close with people who we otherwise probably would never talk to, right?
Yeah.
People from all sorts of different backgrounds, people have all sorts of different interests compared to us, but you're just really close. Like, I got a video on my phone from years ago where we're all hanging out in a barracks room. We got a Puerto Rican. Well, it depends on what day you ask him. He was either Puerto Rican, African American, Mexican, or Italian. Depends on which day of the week it was. He was one of those guys. Or Native American. Almost forgot that one. From Brooklyn, New York. We got who else was there? We have a lesbian from Mexico, oddly enough. We had this white dude from Oklahoma who you could never understand his accent. You'd be like, what language are you speaking? And he would say English, but I don't believe it. We had a surf bro from Florida. We had a glorified hippie from California. We had an Orthodox Jew from Wisconsin. You just had all these people from different walks of life together listening to oldies music for no reason. I don't know why that was the subject of it, but everybody was just doing ridiculous TikTok dances to like music from the 50s and 60s, which was absolutely hysterical. So you hang out with people, you become close with people you never would get close with to begin with. And then you start to judge relationships differently. There's a higher expectation for interpersonal relationships. And when those bonds are broken one way or another, it's felt tenfold compared to the normal community. Psychology, like all this arm table psychology today is just like, oh, cut people out of your lives if they don't contribute, or blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, do you understand how hard that is in reality for people who have been in the service somehow?
Yeah, that's not always possible just because of that support. You don't get that same support from someone who's never experienced those things.
Right. And, I forget where I saw this. It was in relation to PTSD. It was, your significant other or whatever, just, they're not there to try to understand your experience. They're there to make you understand that you're no longer going through that experience.
Okay.
So kind of take that as it is, where it's that's what relationships are after the fact, where you need to understand you're no longer in that situation, and the people there, they're never going to understand that those situations you were in. They just want you to understand you're no longer in those situations. You're safe.
Yeah, and there's such value in that, obviously.
Yeah, it's like the whole, you got to sit with your back to the wall and you got to be able to see the entrance and the whole room. That's not a normal behavior, guys. Please, if that is something that you habitually do, get help for that. That is not a normal behavior. That is a trauma response. that you are just
Well, that
carrying
brings
with
us,
you at all times.
and that brings us exactly to what's next on our list, and it's what are trauma responses.
Um, so inside of the trauma response research, you have a classic conditioned response, which is Pavlovian response. Something happens,
Mm-hmm.
right? Trauma response is a response in correlation to trauma. Then we have the Department of the Navy is doing research on critical event response. So critical event response is, they're focusing this in the aviation community. So you have these pilots, and then you just make everything go wrong at once. What do you address first? How do you get through that situation in a calm manner? Well, I maintain that every response, whether it be conditioned or critical event, is a trauma response, because I have now done something that has made your brain change the way you act. So
Mm-hmm.
perfect example is a friend of mine for his master's thesis. He did testing with an alarm on the iPhone. It's just called Alarm. Maybe you can play it, edit it into the podcast. And it's the same alarm that is used for incoming, the same alarm that is used for general quarters on ships. The alarm means bad things are happening, and you could die, other people could die. So in his research, he found that individuals who had deployed to Iraq, even if they weren't diagnosed with PTSD, when they heard the alarm, they had a trauma response of palms start to sweat, elevated heart rate, dilated pupils, as if that was still happening, as if they were expecting incoming rocket fire. But then people who had never deployed, had never been in that situation, it was just, oh, it's an alarm. So they didn't have the same response as somebody who heard that sound when there was risk to their lives or others. And I'm pretty sure in the first responder community, we can start playing some tones and people are going to jump up. Oh, that's a tone for fire. That's a tone for this or that. Like, it's just drilled into your brain to do that. And it's done through with trauma. It's like any type of military training, first responder training, whether it's fire, police, EMS, you are trained to do things. It's drilled into you so hard, but the reward system is the stick, not the carrot. You fuck it up, bad things happen to you in training.
Yeah.
Because even worse things happen in real life. So
Yeah.
I maintain the theory that military service, being a first responder, regardless of what you went through or saw, it causes trauma, and it can actually reopen past trauma, which you either forgot about or we thought was previously resolved.
So that that conditioned trauma, or conditioned versus trauma, and that tones conversation, where if we hear a certain tone, people are jumping up or looking to jump up. It goes in. You and I talked about this before too. It goes a little deeper than that in some cases, because in one of my stations, we had the tones. It would go off with the lights, and the unit specific lights would come on to tell you who was going. But there was a white hiss, a white noise that would hiss right before the lights came on. And I got conditioned to that, just the hiss, and I would hear a similar hiss, and I'd go to the ceiling to look to see what lights were going to pop on. So I'd know if it was green, I knew I was going, because that meant the truck was going.
Right. And, that's just something that you unconsciously picked up on over time, because your brain started to realize this happens before that. So if I get ahead of the light, we have a higher chance of survival, higher chance of saving lives.
It would be interesting because a rookie would come in and we would run, half a second to a second before him or her to the rig, and they would be confused as to why we were running. And then the lights and the noise would come, and so it would take this lag time for then that rookie to be conditioned into that response. And it was from a psychological standpoint, it was a fascinating experiment to see how long it took.
Right. And, some people pick up on faster than others, but it's that biological need for more time. You know, you can't buy more time. So the faster you do
Mhm.
something, the higher your survivability rate.
So then we talked about the trauma response, condition versus trauma. And then how does that, because the next note that I have, and I got your notes, but the next note I wrote under that was the classic thing that we all talk about, and that's fight or flight.
Fight or flight is a very interesting response. So you ever touch a hot stove or something that's hot and then you pull away from it almost instantaneously? That's a spinal response. Your nervous system has figured out this is bad, get away. Before your brain actually processes what it was.
Mm-hmm.
That's why, let's take recent events. The assassination attempt on Donald Trump in Pennsylvania. You see his hand go up to his ear real quick. He hasn't processed what's happening, but the nervous system has said something just happened. Boom, hand goes up to ear. Okay, now he knows what's going on. That's when he gets down.
Mm-hmm.
It's that very, very quick response that the nervous system has. It's called a spinal response. And your brain's not going to process what's happening for a little bit in comparison to how quick that response is. And then when it comes to fight or flight, now the amygdala comes into play, and what memory you have stored in your brain, essentially. Memory is not here to remind us of the good old days. It's here to keep us alive and how we survive. So the first thing that's happening is your adrenaline is spiking, and you are just doing knee-jerk reaction responses via the amygdala based on past experiences. So running into a burning building is not normal. Running towards gunfire is not normal. But we have been conditioned to do these things through training. We know how to do it. It's something that is not normal, but we've been trained to do so, and how to keep ourselves alive while doing it. So fight or flight, there's going to be a conflict inside the individual on, do we do this? Do we not? But we've been trained with that knee-jerk reaction. We've basically changed our spinal response of go towards it opposed to run away from it. Because, one, that's our job. Two, somebody has to do it. And three, neuroplasticity has said, I know how to do this. This isn't dangerous to me. It's dangerous to the normal person, but not to me. And then the fight or flight response is just very difficult to figure out because have you ever gotten an email? It's just from your boss or something saying, see me right away. And all of a sudden you're starting to think of everything bad you've done in your life.
Yeah.
That's a fight or flight response because you're unsure
Right.
of the situation. You don't know what you're walking into. So your body is activated for a fight, essentially. It's something you have to do. You don't want to do it. You don't know what's going to happen. So you're primed for a fight. That's why, basic training for the military is so hard. That's why fire academies, police academies, that's why they're so hard, because they're putting you in these high stress situations. They're yelling at you. They're in your face. And it's teaching you how to stand your ground there, where most people would just walk away or run away. In this case, it's putting you in a high stress situation that you don't want to be in, that you don't have control of, but it's teaching your nervous system, your fight or flight response to kind of calm down. It's like, I'm not going to die. This is fine. So it's basically upping your tolerance for stress and saying, hey, fight or flight. Yeah, we can fight more than we have to run.
So it's interesting because while you're talking about that, I'm thinking, okay, so in one aspect, we're kind of numbing our response to the dangers we expect on the job, correct?
Correct.
Because we're convincing ourselves it's okay to run into that burning building because I have a pretty good bit of training on how to do it, how to put it out, and how to predict what that fire is going to do from the oxygen or whatever that is introduced into that environment. So we're kind of bringing down that fight or flight, but when we're away from work, but we're talking about it being overactive, correct?
Correct, because think of it this way: regular baseline for a normal person walking down the street. Okay, cool. Baseline for somebody who just got into a gunfight on that street 3 days ago. Oh, what's around that corner? What's around that corner? You know, it's just the perception of the world around you of, am I prepared to fight? Do I know how to fight? If something happens, will I survive? The fact that we've been exposed to these situations, it elevates our baseline because we know that
Right.
we've seen behind the curtain. We know how the sausage is made, opposed to somebody who's never been exposed to these things. They will panic instantly. We have been activated and acclimated towards these situations because we know they're real.
So while we can manage in a crisis that we're used to, it's not elevated in that moment, but it is elevated outside of those moments.
Correct. We can manage, like you said, we can manage crisis that we're used to, but then something obtuse happens and we don't know how to fix it. And that's what causes internal conflict, where it's fix it, do everything you can to fix it. I can't fix it. Oh no, this is bad.
Okay. And it's just very interesting to think of the dichotomy of it, though. And I guess this is where quite often we talk about as first responders, and I'm going to extrapolate that out to veterans and military as well, that we do really well when shit is falling down in front of us, but we do very poorly when we're calm and there's no chaos.
Thanks for listening to another episode of The Things We All Carry. Head over to the website, thethingsweallcarry.com, for show notes, resources, and to sign up for the newsletter. Until next week, take care of yourselves and remember to check in on each other.